like to begin by saying that this is a series of non-academic talks because I've been a student of physics and business, and I have not studied art formally at any university or college. So I bring to you the perspective of a student of art, learning by myself and simply smitten enough to spend 8 to 10 hours a day in learning by myself. So that's, if I can just bring some of my excitement and in introducing the categories that I'm talking about each time, just infecting people with this excitement towards that category, that is the goal of these talks. It is not meant to deliver knowledge. I don't know everything there is to know about any of these categories, but I know a little something, and that I'd like to share with you in this talk. I'm also technologically quite disabled, so I struggle every time with the Zoom talk and the two screens I'm dealing with and two mouse pads and all of these things. So if there are any glitches, please forgive me. Okay, so those of you who attended last time would have seen, would have seen the first part, which is that when we look at any Asian textile or any Asian art, usually it is just the beauty of the art that awes us, that strikes us. So we're busy looking at the motifs and the colors and the layout and, appreciating just the visual aesthetics of the art. Then after our eyes have had their feast, we move on and begin to notice the craft, which is about what kind of cloth was used, what kind of yarn was it hand spun, was it woven or embroidered? If it's woven, I mean, in the case of rugs, we go into all kinds of details as to whether the knotting is symmetric or asymmetric, and that helps you to identify the origin. But if you want to date something or understand exactly the group that it's come from, studying the craft is very useful. And usually we stop with both of these. The art and the craft are sufficient to keep us engaged and delighted. But in most Asian art objects and textiles, definitely, there is a third layer beneath both of these layers of art and craft, and that is the cultural aspect of the textile. Now, this aspect speaks to the soul, and it is this aspect that I try to bring out through these talks, because it is this aspect that has really got me addicted to Asian textiles, Asian and a little bit of African now. So at this talk, we will again explore one such textile, which is the narrative Phad textile of Rajasthan. So to learn about our textile today, again, like last time, let's hop on to our time machines and go to the 14th century to Rajasthan. Many of you would have either visited Rajasthan or have had friends who've been to Rajasthan. The cities there are Jaipur, Jodhpur, Udaipur, Jaisalmer. Amazing architecture, a lot of color, desert, camels, and very, 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 people entrenched in their own culture. They aren't completely affected by changing themselves to suit the modern world. So it's a delight to go there. Even if you're Rajasthani, you go from one place to another and you still can be delighted by the local culture. So this is a very beautiful place. And if you plan to go to India, this is a must visit. So in Rajasthan, in the 14th century, we had a province which was ruled by a particular king called Pabuji. Now there are all kinds of kings and rulers. Some from an era like ours offer us great entertainment as we do, you watch CNN and BBC. It's as good as watching Star World or any other entertainment channel, because our politicians are fun to watch. This is not one country, this is all over the world. I mean, I see, there's so much entertainment to be had just watching politics. Other leaders and other royals choose to enjoy their royal birth for their own personal pursuits rather than devote their lives to the country. I've read of one in a historical document who spent his days trying to shoot arrows at the moon, and eventually he died of boredom. So, if you have everything easy and want for nothing, the life lived may not have the spark of ambition and may leave behind nothing for other generations to remember. I'm not saying that that's a bad choice. Each one can choose whatever they want to do. But it does offer a contrast to the lives of other kings who devote their lives to the country. Some undertake some great development, either in science, technology, art, innovation, or the well being of the people. Or others prevent attrition of their own culture and they preserve their sovereign identity and battle enemies to make sure that their people and their land is protected. These kings will be remembered way beyond their own lifetimes for their deeds. And the king in Rajasthan in the 14th century that we speak of today was one such king. His name was Pabuji Rathod. Now, being a just ruler who always had the interest of his people guiding his decisions, that was just one of the great things he did. I mean, he was very respected for the justice he delivered and for the development, the social ethos in the country during his rule. He was, in addition, also a valiant fighter. In an era when there was no international code of who could invade countries and conquer them for material wealth, battles from hostile invaders were common. So, in one such battle, Pabuji was called to fight, and unfortunately, he died in battle defending his land and his people. During his lifetime, Pabuji was revered as a hero for all the battles that he had won and lived to celebrate. And upon his martyrdom in battle, his status was elevated to that of a folk god. To remember him and worship him, shrines were built, and his legendary life was made known to the next few generations of descendants of the region. So, detailed stories describing his life were painted on the walls of shrines, and all the visitors who came to all these shrines, which were sprinkled across his little province, they all got to learn about his feats and the legends of his life. Now, the shrines, because they were in a fixed location, the dispersion of the story was limited to just that geography, to those who visited the shrine. But in order to spread the story to a larger audience in a wider geography, it was decided that the message would have to be sent out beyond the reach of the stationary shrines. And an elaborate method was designed to disseminate the legend of Pabuji in a way that would capture the hearts and the minds of the people. So in the initial period, centuries ago, the method was a simple multimedia presentation that began to travel around the province. And over time and over repeated presentations, it evolved into a full-blown theatrical performance. Now, any theatrical performance needs an idea as a starting point. And we had that already, which is the legend of Pabuji. Then we need a presenter. We need some sound, maybe some music. We need to figure out the lighting. And we need to plan the setting, the staging, the movements of the presenter, and the seating of the audience. And finally, we need some visual aids like these PowerPoint presentation slides that I'm using today. With all these in place, we'd have a well-planned theatrical performance. And so the method devised centuries ago for the performance had a presenter, the speaker, who is called the Bhopa. Now, Bhopas became, they were from a particular family, and eventually everybody in that family or that clan was enlisted to perform in this theater. And this came to be an ancestral profession for everyone in that clan. And it was handed down from father to son. Along with the Bhopa, there was the Bhopi, his wife, who assisted him, and together they created the performance. The Bhopi also uh, carried a handheld oil lamp that acted as the lighting. The sound is provided by the amazing opera quality voice of both the performers and is accompanied by the Bhopa's unique musical instrument, which is called the Ravan Hatta. You can see it's quite primitive, but it assists him, and it's got some bells on one side, and it's a string instrument, somewhat like a violin. And finally, his visual aid is the textile painted with all the legendary acts of Pabuji that we see as the backdrop or the set that we call in our school plays. So the thing we see at the back is the Phad textile. The shortest way to describe a Phad is a devotional storyboard painted on cloth narrating the story of a prince hero. As we can see, this crowded painting is very busy and has about 70 different scenes in each. Every scene signifies some event from the life of Pabuji, and each depiction conveys something culturally significant. Here we see a conference with some ministers, all wearing lovely clothes. I wish we could make out, whether the patterns that we see in these paintings are embroidery or weaving, or is it just a print? We can't tell that from the painting, but it's still lovely to see the variance from one to another. This one is about 100 years old, this Phad. Here there's a scene of a tiger fight, something that must have happened in his life. I don't know the details of the stories because I haven't sat through the performance, but we're just familiar with the art in this. And his horse is I've not shown that here, but his horse is always shown with one foot in the air. This implies that the owner of the horse died in battle, which is the only honorable way for a king to die. And the way that is depicted in pictures is to show the horse with one leg up. Now, how do we go about absorbing all the stories in this long textile without getting lost? For this, let us explore the setting of the traditional performance in which this textile is used. So the Bhopa and the Bhopi arrive at a village and set up the performance in an area, in a public open ground in the village. They go from one village to another in their bullock carts traditionally. Now, of course, they probably use mechanized automobiles, buses, and other means of transport. But originally, they went in their bullock carts and carried this roll of textile with them. It is 15 feet long and is rolled up during travel on a bamboo. And when they need to set it up, they open it up and suspend it on the bamboo. The area in front of it is cleared up for the Bhopa and Bhopi to perform. And once the sun has set and the day's work is done, villagers arrive and seat themselves on the ground facing the screen. In the dark, the show begins. Note that electricity arrived in these villages only in the recent few decades. In the olden days, sunset meant darkness, almost total darkness. Now, the Phad contains 70 different scenes, so it would be easy for the audience to get lost and get distracted by the numerous illustrations. So, the complete screen is left in darkness at first. Then, the Bhopa opens the performance with a small worship ritual and begins singing. His magical voice is all that our senses can take in because we can only hear him and see very little. And he begins to sing about a particular episode in Pabuji's life. That episode may be drawn in one particular corner of the Phad. So the Bhopa's wife takes the cue and holds the lamp near the scene that the Bhopa is singing about. In that complete darkness, the dim, soft light of the lamp is sufficient to make us focus on that scene. She joins in with the singing, equally trained and in complete command of her notes. Actually, the one I met, she was probably the better of the two singers. And the pair narrate the legends of Pabuji in a spellbinding manner. The man also dances a little using the bells of his anklets for beat and his instrument for melody. The order in which the scenes are narrated are not drawn on the Phad from left to right or even sequentially. The first scene may be on the left, the second scene may be on the extreme right, and so the Bhopa needs to move from one side to the other to tell the story. And in doing so, it creates movement and this retains the interest of the audience. And so, scene by scene, the pair light up the night with their singing, their music, and their little oil lamp. The complete story goes on for about 6 to 8 hours and is narrated through the night. Now, this is an ancestral vocation for the Bhopa. This man I met could not read or write, but yet he had memorized and mastered the epic poem that he narrates for over 8 hours. Traditional Bhopas are very, very poor. I'd even go so far as to say that this man is the poorest man I have met in my entire life. Even living in India, you meet beggars and you meet people in the villages, but this was probably definitely one of the poorest dozen I have ever met. Yet when I gave him, the sum of 2,000 rupees, which is a significant sum, it didn't matter to him at all. He is completely not concerned with money. He just sees it as a means of feeding himself and his family. His whole life is centered around singing the ballad of Pabuji. Now, this old textile, which can also be found in museums, say in the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, there is an example, and the Tropen Museum in Amsterdam has an example. For the visitors to the museum, this is just textile. But to me, I see it as a work that has imbibed the heart-wrenching passion and devotion of the clan of Bhopas over the decades of usage. And it is this aspect that adds soul to the Phad narrative textile and makes it extremely attractive, far more than the art and the craft themselves standing alone would have done. So if you look for these two search words on YouTube, you'll find live performances of these. There's one by the Films Division of India, which doesn't have a translation, it doesn't have subtitles, but you can actually hear them singing in concert. Now, that is an authentic show of the real Pabujis. Now, because there is some commercial viability to these performances for tourists, especially because Rajasthan has a lot of tourism, you see a lot of better dressed Bhopals, and they're doing it just for the entertainment value. They're not doing it for the devotional value. And they wouldn't do these things for their own villagers. They're only doing this for tourists. So that is a different kind of performance. They also mix in other folk songs. But if some of these, when you look at 2, 3 on YouTube, you'll be able to tell the difference between one and the other. So if you want your, the main words are Pabuji Bhopa or Pabuji Ki Fad, and you will get very good videos. And you can tell if it's just a touristy performance by their clothes. So if they're wearing nice, glitzy, glamorous, you know, with some golden thread and all of that, you'll know that that's for commerce and not authentic. So this is the Pabuji Fad from Rajasthan. I know of a few other scrolls. These are done on paper. This is in southern India, where they are spreading the story of Krishna. You know, you may have heard of the Hare Ram, Hare Krishna movement. So the Krishna in that movement, his story is being spread by singers again, who've devoted their life to this, to take this to the villages and educate people about these legends. In Bengal, you have another such scroll called the Patua, where they have folk deities. It's not necessarily the gods, and it's not, but it's all about good moral stories about people whose lives need to be emulated by us common folk. Somebody did something great and something good, and they're talking about these stories in the scrolls. And these come up every now and then in the market, but it's not so much the piece itself as what they were trying to do with the piece that's important. So the complete paradigm together, you know, we can't capture all of that when we buy this single work of art, but at least it offers us a window to walk in and understand the rest of the culture. So with this, I'd like to put the note on our little talk on funds and open the session to questions. Yes, do we have any questions or any discussions? Maybe everyone could unmute themselves.
Hello.
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
What type of paint is used? Obviously, it's not a water base.
These
Is
are
it like a tempera?
these are old. The ones that I've shown you are old paints, but we had some made for Esplanade theaters by the Bay in Singapore, new ones, because this was still it's a living tradition. Oh, it's going to end in 10 minutes, is what they're telling me. But so it they when we had the new ones commissioned, they used mineral paints, mineral pigments. So they use whatever sources. I'm not familiar with the paint world, but I know that they use natural paints and nothing else. And their cloth is burnished. I think before they paint on it, they burnish it with a big uh, rock or a stone. And I have pictures of that. And on my blog, you might be able to see those, where you see the actual process of them making this art.
So are these textiles painted or woven?
No, these are paintings. These are paintings. So the way they do it is they have the outlines first, and because they're going to be used in devotion and useful spiritually by the Bhopas, when they're painting it, because it's a very large stretch of cloth, the painter will sit on it, and there's a whole, again, painting these fuds is also an ancestral profession passed down from father to son. So they sit on it and paint it, but until the eye of Pabuji is painted in, it does not assume any importance. Until then, it's just a cloth, it's just a painting. And at the end, when everything has been done, then they paint in the eye in the presence of the bopa. And then that becomes a cloth which is used for this performance. Okay. Stephanie, did you have something?
Yeah, I guess what my question is to your knowledge, is the paint a water-based or an oil-based paint? I'm guessing it's water-based.
Water-based, yes, yes, yes.
Water-based.
But after the burnishing, it's not like other water-based paints where it can completely, you know, run off. When you, if it gets wet, it still gets fixed into the cloth through the burnishing process. So after it has been painted onto the cloth, this is the second step which they follow. So after, because when they're carrying from one village to another, it often gets wet, there is rain, and you see, you know, always the side on this one you can see, one side is extremely worn out, and that wearing out has happened to the outer layer of the roll, and that's been wet a million times. Some of it is because, you know, the entire household is traveling with them, so they're carrying water for their daily cooking with them in their bullock cart or whatever cart they use, camel carts. So that area gets exposed to water and the elements and gets spoiled, but the paint remains. And it's not like regular watercolor where it would just it's just getting faded and more faded. It's not running over onto another area. So I think it's the burnishing process which helps in fixing that water-based paint.
So this is off topic, but I'm admiring your shawl. Looks like it's double ikat patola cloth.
Yes.
And is it a new piece?
It is a new piece, but this is not it's not called a patola. It is double ikat, but in the eastern coast, Andhra Pradesh, there they do this kind of work, also double ikat. But it's like, unlike the patolas, which are much finer in terms of their motifs are, you know, 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters wide. So that's that much more work. In the Andhra Pradesh ikats, the motifs are larger. So it's maybe half the work, but it's still double ikat, still a lot of work. And these don't cost too much, yeah? So I'm not wearing anything very expensive. It's be about $30 or so.
Wow. So
Yeah, go ahead.
is the narrative of these textiles only about the one king or about many kings?
About, yeah, so there are, in Rajasthan, there are 3 that I know of. So this one was all about Pabuji. So the clan that goes with Pabuji only sings about Pabuji. Then there is another king called Dev Narayan. They sing about Dev Narayan. And there's another king called Ramdev. So these 3 I know of. Maybe there are more even in Rajasthan. And is, you know, probably trying to promote their own little story. And they're called in, they get paid for the performance. So let's say I want to host this, I'll call them in, pay them a little bit, and everybody who watches gives a token amount for the entertainment, or, you know, as something you offer to the worship for worship. So today for us, it's no longer about the worship, but it's about the art that we collect.
So these theatrical backdrops must be really rare in the market because they were owned by the Pabuji only.
Yes, by the Bhopas. So what they do is,
Bopas.
then they get completely spoiled. Like you can see, this one is quite badly ruined on one side. So sometimes if they're not rich enough, and they have 2 brothers now, they need to split, like the father passes away, and this is inherited by 2 brothers. So they cut it up into 2 pieces and use it. Or if they have enough money, they'll come back to the artist and commission another one. And this old piece then is consecrated and it's put into the water, into one of the lakes. Otherwise, now, because the market is coming about for these things, the artist takes it back, gives the bhopa a little bit of a discount, and then he sells these after it's been consecrated. And it's no longer a devotional textile, it's just a piece of cloth. And then it comes to dealers like myself, or collectors like myself. So the first time I saw it was, he was selling it at some very tiny amount, an old piece. And I told that artist, I said, what are you doing? You're right next to the Bombay, the Prince of Wales Museum. Try and sell it to them. And he didn't think he would succeed, but he went to them and they acquired it. And he was very thrilled with me because at that time he received 1,500 US dollars for it. So that old piece for which he had probably paid, a couple of $100, he was able to make money out of it. But that was a good thing for him. Now, every now and then, Christie's, I've seen one in Christie's Kensington maybe 5 years ago. And most often the ones that you see are bits and pieces. They're not the complete piece. Complete pieces are much rarer to come by because they'll usually hold on to it until it's completely tattered. They won't exchange it for a new piece until it's in really bad condition. So people, a lot of people would have just cut off that other end, the faded end in this one that you see, and hold on to the good part. But the lady that acquired this, now this is now in Florida, this piece, the one that you see on the screen. She kept the whole piece. She says, no, I want to, whatever the condition, let me just hold it. This is probably from the 1800s. Outstanding piece. Beautiful colors, which aren't there in the recent pieces.
Do they make these in any other parts of India?
This one is made only in Rajasthan because nobody outside of that place has heard of Pabuji or this entire cultural story. So they've only know about this part. It's only known there, and the artists, the performers, and the audience. Even if they were to come to, say, Bombay to do this, there would not be an audience for this thing. So, that would not help them.
Are the songs standardized so that one Bhopal recites the same thing as another one would?
Yes, I think the songs are standardized, but because the complete performance is 8-9 hours long. If you call them in for a 4-hour thing, they can just do a small performance. Or you can say, okay, let's focus on this aspect because we like the music and the stories. Or my children want to hear about the tigers. Let's teach them about that tonight. So you can pick and choose because it's a very long ballad to sing. So in that sense, now, of course, this is a vanishing culture, yeah? You probably won't have this being seen in the authentic form, say 10 years or 15 years from now.